So every app needs to have an icon. Goes right here on screen 1, there's an icon field. Now, a good icon has transparency, which means it needs to be a PNG. Not all devices will show the transparency, but on the ones that do, it really makes it look better. So how do you get an icon if you don't have time to make the initials? Well, you can just take one of your images that is unique to you already. So I've got my Photoshop open already, and I've got Rebecca's model here. So this is the PNG from her model. So as you can see, this has black, so we'll have to delete this in order to have that transparency. Now it is possible to save your image from Blender with transparency. To do that, when you are rendering it, you have to say Image, Save As, and you get to choose what file format you want to PNG. That's it by default, but it may not have the RGB alpha. So if you say RGBA, it will save it with actual transparency in the background. So those of you that had black in those images, that's where that came from. So if that's the case, what do you do? Well, we're going to use the Magic Wand tool. Now there is a lock that you will find on these that if it's on, when you delete, it's just going to fill it with the background color. So black gets replaced with black. I'm going to turn that off so that now I can use my Magic Wand tool. It lives with the Object Selection tool, and of course you can use your search if you have trouble finding it. Type the word magic, and there's the Magic Wand tool. I'm going to click on this black area, and it has selected all of the black pixels. Now because of the way this was rendered, they are all perfectly black. So even if our tolerance is down to 1, it's still going to select everything perfectly. Press delete on your keyboard, and you now have transparency. Now we need to crop it to a square. It's going to make this into a square anyway when it's on your device, so it's just going to squeeze things down and distort your image. So I am going to crop this. Now I cannot really crop this very well with the selection in place sometimes, so sometimes you have to deselect. Now notice how that made a perfect square. That happened because I chose a ratio that is not the original, but switched it to 1 to 1. So right here you can make it a square, and then you can move things around inside. This is the time when it doesn't really have to be far away from the edges. The icons on the device are already pretty far away. So once you've done that, you can click this checkbox or double click, and you have a nice image. Now, something like this, I would say maybe a levels layer would really help this pop on the device. Let me do that real quick. Layers, new adjustment layer for levels. And let's make the blacks a little blacker and the whites a little whiter. And that really brings up the color. You could do more with it, but that is going to make a fine icon right there. Now, let's export this. We're not just going to save it or export it quickly as a PNG. We're going to use the export as. That gives us options. Let's make sure it's on PNG. Sometimes we want JPEGs. This time for transparency, we want PNG. We want the transparency, and we want it to be a reasonable size. It does not need to be huge for a little icon. The largest I would go would be 512. These are locked together, so it will stay 512 and 511 in this case, but that's still a very large file for an icon. One thing you can do is click this smaller file. It'll reduce the color depth. Doesn't really change the appearance much, but look at the file size, drop down to 46. So that would be pretty darn good. If you want to go even further, then 256 by 256 is also a fine size for these icons, and that brings it down to just 15 kilobytes. Appropriate for something that's just going to be seen when it's installed. But again, this is the first thing people see when they go to buy your app. So it's got to make a good impression. You want it to look good. So when we export this, I just like to give it a very simple name, no extra characters or spaces. You can call this icon, and then I'm going to put Rebecca on there because this was her model. And when when you save that, we're ready to go and add it into MIT App Inventor under the icon. You can upload it first, or you can upload it as you're saying, make this my icon, and go to your App Inventor project folder and find the icon for Rebecca. Now you won't see this till you actually install it on your device, but it really makes a big difference when there are a bunch of apps on there to be able to spot yours at a glance, because that's your model.